Good morning. Welcome everyone to the weekly webinar where QuickSight customers will learn about product functionalities, new feature launches, best practices, and tips on how to improve user experience and gain technical knowledge from QuickSight SAs and product managers. Um, Thanks for joining this session. The topic for today is Spice data refresh schedules using the APIs. I'm Kaushik, a solutions architect for QuickSight. Along with me is my teammate Roy, who will be moderating the session and answering questions in the community. First, I want to talk a bit about our QuickSight community. It's a one-stop shop for all your BI journey. If you're stuck as you're learning QuickSight or looking for solutions, come and ask questions and get your answers. We post featured content and details on planned events to which you can go and register. You can search for questions which have been already asked, access the Learning Center, look at the how-to videos, get access to what's new, and view our latest blog announcements. So we do encourage for you to sign up for the QuickSight community. We host these regular events that are free of charge, and you can find the registration information on the event section of the community. Below is a schedule of the regular events which are being hosted. With that being said, where do we go to ask our questions? Once you are on the QuickSight community page within the slide, here is what the Q&A section looks like on the left-hand side. You can search at the top, and if you don't find an immediate answer, post a new question. You do need an ID to post for the first time, and this will require an Amazon login, amazon.com login. So now would be a great time to join the community and bookmark it for future reference. We will use the community to answer any questions on today's session. To make it easy for us to find the questions that you are asking, you can add tags to easily find the topics. The tag for today is going to be QLS Spice Schedule API. Let me quickly jump out of the slide to show you what it looks like to go and ask a question. So community.amazon.quicksite.com is the page, and I've logged in with my ID. Over here, I'll click on the question and answer. And then on the search bar, you can search for questions, but if you're posting a question, click on the new question itself, provide a title and a description. And the most important thing for today's session is to use the tag that's going to be QLS Spice Schedule API. Let me now jump back to the slides. So to make sure all experts on this live session can get you an answer quickly, please use the hashtag, and we'll be prioritizing these questions all day today. And also the first question most people usually ask is, will you be recording this session? The answer is yes, we will have this posted to our YouTube channel and community by the end of this week. That was about the QuickSight community. So now let's focus on today's session. The agenda is, I'll start with an overview of what Spice is, then explain the different data refresh possibilities, and then in the demo, we will look at the data refresh possibilities into Spice using the schedule, using the APIs to create those schedules. So SPICE stands for Super Fast Parallel In-Memory Calculation Engine. It stores a snapshot of your data, and each data set which is using SPICE can store up to 1 billion records or 1 terabyte, whichever comes first. The benefit for you is that it provides fast performance no matter how many concurrent users are active. With QuickSight being a serverless AWS managed solution and Spice being part of it, you don't have to worry about managing or scaling it, think about software upgrades or patches. As I said, Spice stores a snapshot of your data. So when the underlying data sources are being updated, you would also need to import the new data into Spice. For this, you have three possibilities. The first is you can manually trigger the process from the QuickSight console to start the data ingestion. Within the slide, in the screenshot where you have where we have refresh now, uh, clicking on that would start that process manually. The second possibility is to follow an event-driven approach by using the QuickSight APIs. And the third possibility is to create schedules which execute at defined frequency to start the data ingestion process into Spice. This is possible using the UI or the APIs. In the screenshot, this would be adding a new schedule. Once you have decided how you want to refresh the data into Spice, you can then perform a full refresh. In a full refresh, you're bringing all the data from the data source every time it is being executed. This works for all data sources supporting it. For SQL data sources connected to databases, you can further configure an incremental refresh, which will import the data changes which happen within a specific time frame. So this is a subset of records that you're bringing into Spice. The time frame you can configure could be by day, hour, or week. So for today's demo, we will look at the third possibility, which is creating schedules for full refresh and incremental refresh using the QuickSight APIs. Also, we will look at the other APIs that allow us to manage these schedules. Now, let's take a look at the demo. Uh, Let me switch over. So consider the following scenario where I have sample e-commerce order data, which is stored in an S3 bucket. And this data is being queried using Amazon Athena, which is a serverless interactive analytics service. My table is e-commerce orders. Amazon QuickSight has a native connection to Athena. So what I've done is I have created a data set in QuickSight with the query mode set to Spice. We go to click edit data set. So the query mode is set to Spice. And what I want to do now is go ahead and create those. What I want to do now is to create schedules which run at specific time intervals so that Spice can be updated with any new data arriving in my S3 bucket. Through the UI, through the QuickSight UI itself, I can go and create the schedules. So what are some of the advantages of using the schedule APIs? Consider the scenario where you have many data sets which have been created and they have their schedules, and now you would have to change the frequencies for all of those data sets. Or another scenario where a lot of data sets are being created and new schedules have to be created for these data sets, and they for these data sets, manually creating a schedule for each data set is time consuming. Using the APIs would simplify this process. The second advantage is if you're deploying the QuickSight assets using infrastructure as code, uh, you would also want to have the refresh schedules configured within the same data pipeline. And the data, so this is now also possible as these refresh schedules are available in AWS CloudFormation. Finally, from the QuickSight console itself, you get the schedule information. For example, within this dataset, I have 5 schedules which are configured. Using the APIs, you can extract metadata details of the dataset, the schedule configurations, and create a summary view of all your datasets and schedules. So now let me go ahead and create the schedules for the dataset that I've created, which is e-commerce orders V1. I will be running this demo in a Jupyter Lab notebook, which is using the AWS SDK for Python to make these QuickSight API calls. If you're familiar with other programming languages, here's a list of available SDKs. Roy will post this link as well in the chat. So back to the Jupyter notebook. So a word about this Jupyter notebook. I've created an IAM role that has full access to QuickSight, and this notebook can assume that role. So at first, what I'll be doing is I'll be assuming this role. So I will be assuming this role, and then using the assumed role credentials, I will create the QuickSight client. With that done, I can start making API calls to QuickSight. Let me switch over to the dataset itself in QuickSight. So I have this dataset already created. I've created this dataset also using an API call, which was create a dataset, passing in the dataset ID, name, and also the most important, setting the import mode to Spice. Now let's look at the schedule APIs. The first schedule, what I would like to create is to import the data using an incremental refresh. In an incremental refresh, I'm only bringing a subset of the data. And for incremental refresh to be configured, I will have to first define a look back window. A look back window here means that QuickSight will send a query to the underlying data source and bring the data changes based on a specific time frame. In my scenario of the e-commerce table, I'm looking at the orders which are coming every 1 hour. So as part of this, creating this look back window, I will use the API call put dataset refresh properties. I will pass in the AWS account ID, the dataset ID as well. I've stored this dataset ID in a variable over here, just to scroll up. So this is the variable where I've stored it, and I'll be using it throughout this code. As part of the look back window configuration itself, I require a column name. This has to be of type date time. In my data set, it's going to be order purchase timestamp. The size is 1 and the size unit is R. So I'm looking back at data for the last 1 hour. I could also configure it for one day and week. Let me go ahead and run this cell. This provides me a response that this configuration has been successfully executed. I can take a look at what was just configured using the describe dataset refresh properties. If you have other datasets, you could also use the describe dataset refresh properties to check if there are any, if there is a look back window that has been configured. Executing this cell provides me the response, and we can see over the details over here. It's configured for the column name order purchase timestamp and looks back 1 hour. With the look back window configuration complete, I want to create the incremental refresh, which will run every 15 minutes in the Europe Berlin time zone and set it to start tomorrow. For this, I will be using the API create refresh schedule. Here I'm passing in the dataset ID, the AWS account ID, and a few schedule parameters. The first is schedule ID. It's going to be my dataset name and adding a suffix which is incremental. This is for easier for me to then also in future when I am checking what are my schedules, it makes it easier for me to understand. The schedule frequency is set to run every 15 minutes and the time zone is set to Europe and Berlin, and it will start tomorrow at 8 o'clock. From the UI, just to show you, if I set it to incremental, you also have other possible frequencies that you can use. Let me go ahead and execute this cell. I get a response that my incremental refresh schedule has been successfully created, and this is the schedule ID. Next, what I also want to do is execute a full refresh, which runs on a daily basis at 6 p.m. in the Europe Berlin time zone, and I want it to also start from tomorrow. I'll be using the same API create refresh schedule, passing in the dataset ID, the AWS account ID, and within the schedule, for the full refresh, I'm passing in the schedule ID with the dataset name itself with the suffix which is full. The interval is set to daily, time zone is Europe Berlin, starts at 6 o'clock in the evening, and it will start from tomorrow. Let me go ahead and also execute this cell. I get the response that this schedule also has been successfully created. So at this point, if I refresh my QuickSight page and go to the refresh tab, we will be able to see the two schedules that were created. So I can take a look at these schedules also from the QuickSight console. Through the API, I can use list refresh schedules. So let me run the list refresh schedules where I'm passing in the AWS account ID and the dataset ID. And the list provides me all of the schedules that were configured. In my scenario, we have two schedules that have been configured and the details are also visible. This is if I want to see all of the schedules. What if I want to see just one of the schedules that has been configured for this data set? In that scenario, I can use the describe refresh schedule API. I'll be passing in the AWS account ID, the dataset ID, and the schedule ID. In my scenario, as an example, I would like to see the schedule frequency details for e-commerce orders V1 full. That's what I'm passing over here. Running the cell once again brings me the metadata details for that schedule. Next, I am storing this specific schedule ID in a variable. What I want to do next also is there has been a change with a request that this schedule, which is configured, the full refresh has to be changed to monthly. In that scenario, I will use the update refresh schedule API and change the full refresh happening from daily to monthly. Here, I'm passing in the dataset ID, account ID, and the schedule parameters. The schedule ID is going to remain the same. It's going to be the e-commerce orders V1 full, but the interval now would change to monthly, and this will run on the first day of every month in the same Europe Berlin time zone at 6 p.m. in the evening. The important aspect here is to make sure that the refresh type is set to full refresh. Let me go ahead and execute this cell. I get a response that this has been successfully executed. I could again use the describe refresh schedule uh, to actually view the metadata details of the full refresh. As we can see, this has been set to run monthly on the first day of every month. Refreshing my QuickSight page and going back to the refresh tab itself, we can also see the change has taken effect where the full refresh will occur on a monthly basis. Finally, if there is a requirement that this data set is not going to be updated anymore and the refresh is not, there is no requirement for these refresh schedules. In that scenario, I can delete those schedules using the delete refresh schedule API. For this example, I will be deleting the e-commerce orders V1 full schedule. This is a full refresh on a monthly basis. Let me go ahead and execute this cell. I get a response that this has successfully executed. Refreshing once again my QuickSight page, going back to the refresh tab itself, we can see that the monthly refresh schedule has been deleted. At last, when we configured the created the incremental refresh schedule, I had to configure a look back window. Again, if the schedules are not going to be executed anymore, I can as well go ahead and delete this look back window. So that would be similar to in the UI, which is reset the incremental refresh configuration. Do note when you reset or in through the API, delete the look back window configuration, a full refresh will happen to handle this change. So the API is delete dataset refresh properties, passing in the account ID and the dataset ID. Executing the cell once again, I get a response that the look back window configuration is deleted. A point to note also is if the look back window configuration is deleted and the schedule itself is not deleted, the next time if the schedule automatically runs, then it will fail since the prerequisite itself is the look back window configuration. And that brings me to the end of this demo where we saw how we can create the full refresh and incremental refresh schedules using the APIs. We can also use the list refresh schedule and the describe refresh schedule APIs to manage schedules, get metadata information. Finally, to delete those schedules, we can use the delete refresh schedule API. And for the look back window configuration itself, to delete it, it would be delete dataset refresh properties. Now I'll jump back to my demo screen, to my PowerPoint presentation. I have a few more information to share, which is we have the next week's learning series sessions on the 20th and 27th of July. Register in the community, and you can also go ahead and register for these events. We have other upcoming events like Analytics N15 on the 18th of July and a workshop on the 26th of July, which will show you how easy it is to get started with Amazon QuickSight to build your insights. Thank you for attending this session. Please provide us your feedback that will help us improve future sessions. And yeah, thanks again.